Hello everybody, Rab here, the storyteller, writer, poet, and occasionally I swim in Galway Bay as well. I've just had a morning swim, so I'm feeling refreshed and ready to tell some poems and some stories, kind of adventure poems, adventure stories. Before I start, just a wee bit of a background stuff. What I'm going to be doing this is I'm going to be putting up some pictures as well, and they were created by my friend Marina Wild. She's a great illustrator, to go with these poems and pictures. I'd also like to thank Siobhan Arkins over at the Galway City Library for inviting me to share some of my adventurous stuff with you. And also a big thank you to Galway City Libraries and Galway City Council for supporting this wee video. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with an adventure poem, and then I'm going to tell a story. I'll give you a bit of background to the story, we'll get into that, and then I'll finish with other adventure poems too as well. All right, give me a wee second. I'm just going to do my thing here, go to my screen share, so you can all see what I'm going to do. All right, so you can see this here. This is the Princess and the Dragon, and I'm doing it this way so you can see the pictures as well. These are some of the lovely pictures that Marina put together. So I'm going to just read it, sit back and enjoy. This is the story about a princess, which begins rather sad, for when Sophie was a little girl, she lost her mum and dad. Princess Sophie was taken then by her wicked Uncle Ming, whose only ambition in life was to become the country's king. And there he is there. I'll marry you when you're big enough to wear a wedding gown. Till that day you'll be locked away in a castle far from town. Poor Sophie was imprisoned in a draughty castle, dull and grey, with an enormous dragon sat outside to stop her running away. The dragon had teeth like knives and a long forked tongue. Flames puffed from his nose. His breath smelled like a badger's bum. But the world-famous League of Knights, who saved damsels in distress, decided saving Sophie would make a fine manly test. They vowed to rescue Sophie and smite the dragon dead, and defeat wicked Uncle Ming's plan to put a crown upon his head. With swords and spears for battle, and scones and tea for the rest, one by one each knight took on this awful, dangerous quest. But alas, whilst every knight was allowed to step in the castle door, the minute they stepped out again, the dragon gave a fearsome roar. Roar! Some nights it ate up, gulp. Others it burnt to a crispy toast. But squishing knights flat was the thing it enjoyed the most. For many years there remained, my apologies, after many years there remained only one poor little knight. His name was Edgar, and the trouble was he did not like to fight. But nonetheless he polished up his sword and his thermos flask, and off he went on shaky legs to attempt the fearful task. Outside the castle Edgar stood, wobbling like a jellyfish, and spluttered, hello, I'm here to rescue you, dear miss. Sophie was surprised to see a knight who wasn't all muscles and moustache, whilst Edgar blushed shyly and gave a nervous laugh. As fast as lightning, love zapped between each of their hearts, and he and she gazed at the other whilst giving little gasps. Oh. Outside, the dragon flexed its mighty metallic form, its wings stretched, its mouth snarled, sunlight flashed from its horns. As poor Edgar stepped outside again, he heard a terrible crash and saw that beast whose very breath turned mighty rocks to ash. But then the little knight stopped, quaking with shame and fear, for he saw something most curious as a terrible beast drew near. As it roared, the monster rubbed a talon across its belly, whilst from its rear did appear a yellow gas so smelly. The poor creature has indigestion, whispered Edgar to the princess. A fizzy drink should set it right, I think. Well, more or less. Side by side our heroes stood, shaking cans of fizzy pop. The dragon opened its fearful mouth, and they threw in the entire lot. The beast suddenly leapt upwards, then landed upside down. Its wings twitched weirdly, whilst its legs flapped around. It rolled about the ground so hard 'twas like an earthquake. His eyes burrowed, his bottom whistled, its great belly began to shake. The creature leapt behind a rock. There came a plop and a gasp. Then, "Is there any toilet roll?" they heard the creature ask. Later, while the dragon savoured a life of happy tummy bliss, Sophie and Edgar shared their very first kiss. Then the grateful dragon invited them to sit on its back, and with a roar and a leap, his mighty wings did flap. Off the friends flew then, the dragon, the boy, and the girl, to seek new adventures all around the world. So there you go. That's the kind of poems I come up with when I'm swimming in Galway Bay. Okay, so we pause for a wee minute, and then I'm going to tell you another wee story. Okay, so I'm now going to tell you a story. Oh, that was a wee adventure poem there. I'm going to do a story now. And it's my take on an older Irish folk tale. And I love Scottish and Irish folk tales because even though they're quite old, some of them, they're still very immediate, they're very adaptable, and you can step into them and change them to the world you're in now, and they've still got all that magic and wonderful stuff. And so I was commissioned to write a book, which was very, very exciting. I'll show you the cover of the book just now. So this is the book I was commissioned to write, West of Ireland Folk Tales for Children. And I wrote it, and the picture, you can see one of the pictures in the front there, is again from my friend, Marina Wild. She's done the illustrations in the book. So I was to take a deep dive into folklore of the West of Ireland. So the book's in kind of two halves. The first half, as I took a deep dive into the kind of the history of how the fairy folk came about, the good folk came about, all the kind of backstory there and all that, the adventures and all the things they did. And then the second half of the book is a series of actual folk tales from the west of Ireland, and my stepping into them again and playing with them and rearranging them and making them anew. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tell you one of those stories. Let's come off there for a minute. I'm going to tell you one of the stories, and yeah, it's called The White Trout, and it was originally written down, now let me get my facts right, in 1831 by a man. I've got his name here. I'm just going to look over here. What was he called now? Oh yeah, Samuel Lover. And he wandered around Ireland and he collected stories and wrote little stories, done a bit of music, some songs, things like that. Done a bit of painting as well. And one of the stories he collected from Cong was called The White Trout. And then 50 years later, in the 1880s, W.B. Yeats included it in an anthology of folk tales that he created. And one of the things I love about this story, and not just because it comes from up the road, is that it deals with something really immediate to now. It's about the 1830 version. It's about a soldier who's kind of hiding from the wars. He's just getting a bit of headspace from the wars. And he takes himself up to the countryside round kind of Knockma and Cong up there. And he has an encounter with something from the folklore in that area. And it just seemed to be so perfect, a story. And this is as true today. People, whether they're civilians or soldiers, they get scunnered with war and they look for places to get their heads back together. So when I rewrote the story, I kind of made it a wee bit more modern. But it's basically the same, follows the same structure. And of course, it's called The White Trout. What I'm going to do is I'll tell a wee bit, then I'll show one of my friend Marina's lovely stories, pictures. She's done pictures for the story. Okay, so let's enjoy the story of The White Trout. So once there was a soldier and he was wounded in body and soul and he fled away from battle. And in time he came to live in the country between Knockma and Cong. And he built himself a wee shack in the woods and he kind of hid out there. Now of course everybody immediately knew there was somebody out there. Folk always know what's going on. And visitors came calling and they were very kind and they offered him advice and they offered him help and they brought a wee bed for him, a stove, and a table and 2 chairs. So the soldier, he thanked folk and he was grateful, but he didn't smile and he wouldn't invite them into his wee shack. You know, he was wounded in body and soul and he struggled to keep his own anger at bay, so he preferred just to be left alone. However, there was one local fella and his name was Porrig, and he persisted. There's always somebody that persists. He persisted. He would come round every day and he'd chat the door. How are you? The soldier said, fine. And Porrig was patient. And one morning he turned up the soldier's door again, and this time he was carrying a rod and line. And he also brought a piece of advice. And he said to the soldier, you can eat well here and clear your head at the same time. Was that so? Said the soldier. The river is filled with trout at this time of the year, said Porrig. In fact, it is so full that some of the poor fishes would welcome a change of scenery. You'd be doing them a favour if you caught them, cooked them, and put them in your belly. Now, the angry soldier wanted to close the door, but Porrig got his foot in and carried on. Nothing beats fishing on a clear day with the sound of the birds above you and the splash of the river around you. Well, the soldier looked at the long, thin rod. He'd never fished in his life and was not sure what to make of the contraption. However, the thing about a soldier is he knows that ignorance is dangerous. It's important a man understand how things work. So he looked at Porrig and he said, okay, come in, show me how it works. Gladly, my name is Porrig. Porrig held out his hand. The soldier hesitated and then held out his. "I am Isa," said the soldier, and they shook hands. Well, eventually, after a bit of chat, the two men went for a walk through the woods. Porrig was saying, "I'll show you how to go about fishing." So on they walked, and the insects buzzed and the birds sang beautiful songs. The trees were draped in greens, and between the foliage sunlight glinted like jewellery. And soon they came to a river that was not so big, but big enough and deep enough. The bottom of the river was lined with soft-edged stones, reds and browns, greys and blacks, all polished up like boots on a parade ground. Porrig sat on the river bank and pointed. "Look there." Isa looked and saw something move in the shaded part of the water. "These are trout," explained Porrig. "Now sit down beside me and I'll show you how to catch them." And that's what they did. All day they caught fish, and eventually caught a dozen between them. Finally, in the early evening, they walked back to Isa's simple wee shack. And Porrig said, "May I show you how to cook them?" And the wounded soldier nodded. "Yes, thank you." So in the little shack, Porrig showed the wounded soldier how to gut and clean fish. Then, while butter melted in a large pan, he rolled each fish in flour, salt and pepper. When the butter bubbled, he placed 2 of the trout in. 5 minutes later, they were ready for eating. "Delicious," grinned Isa. "Delicious to eat and delicious to smell." And that was how Porrig became the very first person who was made welcome to the home of the wounded soldier. And before we carry on, what we'll do is we'll have a wee look at one of my friend's pictures that she drew for this. That's what we're going to do. Is we'll go here, and if we pop down here, you can see, oh, there's one of the pictures. There's Porrig, and there's Isa catching the trout. Okay, let's get back to the story. All right. Now, over the weeks, the two men went fishing just about every other day. They didn't speak much, but they were quite content in each other's company, and also just being out in nature is always a lovely thing. And then one day, they went a little bit further along the path, and they came to a place where the river widened into a deep pool. "The trees are thicker here," said Porrig. "There's more shade, which keeps this spot cooler in the summer and shields it from the worst of the winds in the winter. It's a perfect spot." "It is lovely," agreed Isa. "People don't fish here though," said Porrig. "It's more a place for sitting and thinking." "But look," cried Isa, "over there is a huge trout. See, it is white. It is big enough to feed me for a week." Porrig laughed and looked up at his friend. "Ah, now, nobody tries to catch the white trout. Shall I tell you why?" So Isa sat down and he listened, and Porrig told this story. "A long time ago, there was a king who ruled these parts. His daughter was kind, clever and witty. She also knew her own heart and told her father she was determined that she would marry only for love and never for politics. The king, who loved his daughter very much, agreed to this. Now, from when she was a child, the princess would come to this very pool to bathe and rest. She was attended by her handmaidens at the pool, and beyond the trees were posted guards with orders to detain anyone who would dare violate her calm retreat. The pool was her place, and as private as her own bedchamber. And when the princess became a young woman, the pool became even more important to her as a place to reflect and consider the life before her. Now, in time, the princess fell in love with the son of a rival king. Despite their history, the two monarchs agreed their children should marry. There was great hope that the marriage would bring an end to the conflict in the land. On the morning of her wedding, the princess came to her beautiful pool to bathe. It was a hot day of shimmering sunlight, and the princess delighted in cooling her limbs in the fresh, clean water. I'll show you another little picture from my friends. Here we go. That's Porrig and Isa. And down here, we have a little picture of the princess. And there she is. She's very relaxed there, just sitting in the water. She's a bit like myself when I go swimming in Galway Bay. I love the water on me. So she's nice and relaxed there. And it's the morning of her wedding. Well, she was relaxing. But then suddenly there was a sound of uproar beyond the trees. Quickly she dried and dressed, whilst one of her handmaidens went to ask the guards what was happening. As she was combing her hair, the handmaiden returned. With her were 2 guards. Between the 2 guards stumbled a man, his face so distraught and soaked with tears and grime that for a moment the princess did not recognise him. Then she realised it was the manservant of her beloved prince. And she knew then that the man she loved was dead. She would never see her prince again, never again hold him in her arms or listen to his great plans and his soft laughter. He was gone from her, and all they'd planned together, adventures, children, old age, and shared joys and sorrows, all was gone. The manservant wailed that his master had been killed by assassins on his morning walk. He said much more, but the princess did not hear him. Her strength fell out of her, and she collapsed on the bank of the beautiful pool. Porrig paused for a moment in the telling of his story. The green leaves shifted and sighed like an ocean. Indifferent to the world's sorrows, sunlight and shadow played on the water and on the grassy bank. Go on, demanded Isa. Go on. So Porrig started the story again. Excuse me. The princess grieved, continued Porrig. There was no end to her grief. Days and years passed, but her sorrow only sharpened. Every day she walked with her 3 handmaidens to this pool, but she would not bathe there. Instead, she demanded of the water, "Where is my betrothed? Where is my husband to be?" The princess was loved by the people of the realm and by her handmaidens and her father. But as time passed, love was tempered by impatience. "People die all the time," some complained. "The princess must allow her wound to heal over," said others. It was disrespectful for her to be so focused on the death of her beloved that she failed to celebrate his life. She was young, yet she would love again, said others. The king needed grandchildren, and it was selfish of her to not look for a new husband. But grief is a personal thing, said Porrig, and there's no right way or wrong way of suffering it. Sometimes when she stood by the pool, the princess would try to talk her handmaidens of her lost love, of his laughter and his eyes, but the words would catch in her throat like a hook, and she could not speak them. Her handmaidens talked amongst themselves about their mistress. She would be better off dead, snapped one. Better if she was fully alive, said another. If only she would bathe in the pool again, spoke the third quietly. Perhaps the water would wash the grief off her. The 3 maidens all agreed. But though they thought and thought and talked, they could not come up with a plan for getting the princess to bathe in the pool. Finally, in despair, all the silly maidens whispered at the same time, Oh, I wish your princess would bathe in the pool again. And so that's what happened. Next day, they accompanied the mourning princess to the pool, but again the princess refused to bathe. She stood staring at the water and demanded, "Where is my betrothed? Where is my husband to be?" Just then a loud rustling alarmed the handmaidens. They looked towards the trees, but there was nothing there. When they turned back, the princess was gone. The maidens searched, and the guards searched, but nothing was found of her on the river bank or in the woods. Then the men and women searched the pool, and there they saw a large trout, his body as white as a wedding gown, and knew that her mistress had been transformed. There the white trout has remained to this day. Some say she is waiting for her beloved prince yet. Others say that she is waiting for all the grief to be washed from her, for only then can she join her prince in heaven. And others say the trout is just a trout, though large and white and long living. Porrig smiled at his companion, but the wounded soldier's face was dark with anger. Snatching up his rod and line, the wounded soldier hissed, "I am not a fool that you can trick and taunt me with fairy tales." And with that, Isa hurried along the trail back to his shack. There he stayed all day, refusing to open the door when Porrig knocked on it. Wounded in body and soul, the soldier struggled to keep his anger at bay. Porrig eventually stopped knocking and left. Isa paced the floor of his small home, his anger growing brighter and fiercer, until he knew what he must do. He would go that very night, and he would catch the white trout. Catch it, kill it, cook it, and eat it. Late in the evening, Isa made his way back to the pool. Above the branches and leaves of the trees, stars blinked. It was a cool night and beautiful, but Isa thought only of the white trout and how he would soon slaughter it. When he came to the pool, he saw the water was as black as the night sky. The fish floated lazily in the darkness, its whiteness glowing like a dream. Isa, calmer now, attached a hook to the line. On the hook, a worm wriggled. Isa cast his line and waited. He waited a long time, but the fish showed no interest. It simply swam in a slow white circle. Frustrated, the wounded soldier threw aside his rod and stepped into the night black pool. "I'll catch you with my own hands," he muttered, and he began to wade towards the fish. As he walked, the pool got deeper, and until the cold water was up to Isa's waist. Shivering, he looked around, and to his surprise, saw that the fish was only 2 or 3 feet from him. The creature was no longer swimming in a circle, but floated in one spot, just beneath the surface of the water. Isa looked at it, and he was sure his expression changed on its face. "Did you just smile, my dear?" he cooed softly to the creature as he stepped closer and closer. And then suddenly he leapt at the creature. Too late, the fish tried to escape. It pounded the water with its powerful tail, twisted and writhed in the snare of the soldier's arms, but Isa held fast. Even when he slipped beneath the water, gagging and choking, he held on to the massive, heavy beast, and soon enough he made it back to dry land. Oh, one of the wonderful pictures. There he is. He's caught the big trout, and it is a huge big trout there. He's caught the trout, and now he's going to take it back to his house, his wee shack. What's going to happen? Well, let's see. Isa ran through the woods. Clothes were heavy and sodden, his arms aching as he held onto the gulping, flapping fish. He got into his shack and he threw the fish to the floor. The creature's tail whipped side to side, almost knocking the wounded soldier over, but nothing could stop him now. The stove was lit, the butter placed in a large pan, and the gutting knife was picked up. Isa bent down by the large writhing fish. He grabbed its head and brought the knife slicing down. The fish, frantic with fear, twisted aside. The knife cut the fish, but did not kill it. Again and again the wounded soldier brought the knife down, but now the creature writhed and twisted so fast and so frantic that no more blows landed on it. "I'll cook you alive then," roared Isa. At that he grabbed up the giant fish and he threw it into the pan. The fish screamed and leapt out from the pan, and as it screamed and as it leapt, the horrified Isa saw it change. He saw it change from a fish into a young woman, robed in white. We'll see if we can find you the picture of that. There we go. There's the fish transformed. The tail of a fish, and the head and arms of a woman. Poor Isa, horrified at what he'd done. Well, Isa saw it change. Change my fish into a young woman robed in white, who landed in a heap on the floor before him. Shaking and dumbfounded, Isa dropped the knife. The woman struggled to her feet. She stood before Isa with tears in her eyes and a terrible ragged wound on her breast. "Throw me back," she moaned. "Throw me back before I bleed to death." And Isa did so. He shook off the killing madness and praying to God for forgiveness. He gently lifted the woman. He ran through the darkness, weighed down by the woman and his own grief. The night was dark and his burden heavy, but he did not slip, not even once. Soon he reached the pond where he gently lowered the woman into the water. Instantly, she turned back into the white trout. The wound in its side closed up and healed, leaving only a red mark. With a splash, the creature swam down into the darkest part of the pond. There is little more to say about the wounded soldier and the white trout, but say it I will. Porrig found his friend next day lying by the pool. His clothes were damp and stained with blood. He took him back to his shack and cleaned him up and put him to bed, where he slept for 2 solid days. What Isa dreamt about during those days nobody knows, but when he awoke, his simmering anger had vanished. He remained a quiet man, but the quietness had a reflective, curious quality, as if Isa was noticing the world anew and was humbled by what he saw. He admitted to his friend that he had tried to catch the fish and vowed never to do so again. Well, the years rolled by. Porrig and Isa walked, sometimes talked. They caught fish and visited the pool of the white trout. If Porrig noticed the red mark on the fish, he did not say. For a long time, the white trout remained wary of Isa. It would hide in the shadows whenever he came by. But gradually the fish let go its fear and began swimming in its usual lazy, contented fashion. Isa had a knack for making and fixing things, a good survival skill for a soldier, an even better social skill if living in rural Ireland, and he made a little money as a local handyman. He also made friendly acquaintances. He was happy enough and even developed a droll sense of humour. It was noticeable, though, that he never spoke about his previous life to anyone, at least not to anyone who walked on 2 legs and lived on dry land. Sometimes, When Porrig went for a walk by himself through the woods, he would come across Isa sat at the pool's edge. His friend would be talking to the trout. But Porrig made a point of not listening. He'd make a lot of noise to alert his friend and call out a cheery hello. Isa lives a long life and a happy one, but as God intended, we are all mortal, and in time Isa's journey in this world finished. But now he was grey-haired and old, and he passed. His funeral was packed out and was filled with joy and laughter. After the funeral, Porrig, who was an old man now as well, went for a walk into the woods. He was ancient and walked slowly between two of his great-grandchildren. They came to the pool, and one of the children asked, "Grandpa, where is the white trout?" But the white trout had gone and was never seen again. For my part, I like to think that Isa and the princess travelled to heaven together. There, I have no doubt, they met again with the loved ones they'd once lost a long, long time ago. So there you go. That's a lovely wee story. I think what we'll do is we may have time to tell another wee tale. Oh. Now, so what I'm going to do is do one last little adventure poem. Nice little bit of silliness, just to finish off. And then I might go back for another swim in Galway Bay, but I won't be cooking any trouts. I'll leave them alone. I don't think you get trout in the bay anyway. It's in the river, isn't it? I think so. Okay, I'm going to do one last little story. And what I'll do is I'll do again, it's a poem with pictures from my friend Find a Wild. So we'll do that. Just get that for us.